From the University of Nebraska at Omaha, this is NCITE Insights. I'm your host, Ben Badafarano. Today on the podcast, we'll be discussing a new NCITE report that details 10 case studies of malign uses of AI technologies. Our guests are two of the authors, NCITE Senior Scientist and Director of Academic Research, Dr. Sam Hunter.
Okay.
And thank you for being here. And NCITE IO Psychology doctoral student, Alexis D'Amato. Sam, Alexis, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I was really excited about this report because I think so much of AI technologies is always sort of like vague and abstract, or it has been at least in the past few years. And I think a lot of the fears about them are super vague as well. So I think this report helps make it kind of more concrete, which I really appreciate because it's just case studies, very clear-cut things. So to read the full report, there's going to be a link in the description, so please check that out to read the full report, but we're going to go over just a few of the cases today and some of the overarching themes that you can see through them. So, yeah. So what was the impetus behind this report, and how did you go about choosing these specific cases?
Yeah, I can start, and then Alexis can jump in since you were so important on actually getting the thing done. We also want to thank Emma Theobald, who's lead author on the project and was her baby for a while. So we'll try to do justice to everything that Emma did.
Yeah.
So we're academics and nerdy scientists and love doing academic research. One of the things that we study is novel threats. When we think about what's on the horizon, it's often technology linked. And so leaning into new and emerging forms of technology. And then we're very fun at parties because we then ask the question of how do the bad guys use this stuff? And so as soon as AI started to become more ubiquitous, it's been around obviously for a long time, but when it started to be something that was a daily use by a lot of folks, we would then ask that question of what's the application here from a malign perspective. And so then we started writing and doing our research in the academic world. One of the things I think that NCITE does particularly well is says, all right, how do end users and the folks that are dealing with this stuff on a day-to-day basis actually have to wrap their heads around this emerging problem? And so in addition to doing the kinds of academic research that we do, we always think about what are practical applications. I don't think there's a better practical application than the case study approach. Stories go a long way in just illustrating the nature of the problem, of the threat. And so we're really trying to meet our end users, the folks that are tasked with stopping this kind of stuff. We're trying to give them tools and examples and illustrations in a way that meets them where they are. I don't know if you have any thoughts on sort of the background on it, but.
Yeah, we always used these examples as like illustrations when we were trying to explain what our work was, and there wasn't a huge baseline. So Emma really spearheaded finding the 10, and then now we have this framework that we can apply. What happened? Why did it happen? What's the psychological framework behind how it happened that we can use for future case studies to really understand how people are using AI in malign ways.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because when I think we've done podcasts with Sam in the past, you've been on a few times, and one of the studies that you looked at specifically was the assassination attempt on Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
In 2021, I believe.
Yeah.
About there, by a 21-year-old.
Yeah.
Do you mind, because you've talked a little bit about that case before, but I was wondering if you wouldn't mind just jumping into that one and kind of describing the background on that story.
Yeah, do you want to start?
Sure. So the perpetrator of that case, he had a girlfriend that was an AI girlfriend, and he was upset about a former attack that had happened like in the 1800s, I believe it was. And so that was really the impetus of his hatred towards Queen Elizabeth and like a formal hierarchy like that in government. And so he just interacting with his AI girlfriend, really bonding with this AI agent, got support from this girlfriend, and she ended up helping plan it and encouraged him to go through with the attempt assassination. Yeah.
It's such a strange idea that Because what would you call that? Like, is there a technical term for that? Is that like a parasocial, not a parasocial relationship?
Yeah, it's a little different than parasocial. I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's a new phenomenon in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
because you're sort of, forming relationships and genuine bonds with a digital entity. And it's timely, I think, for a couple of reasons. One is this series of threats against public officials is something that NCITE studies and we're seeing more of. But then even over the weekend, and this is not related to any type of attack, but there was a story on CBS, sort of saw it on my newsfeed this morning, about a man who ultimately fell in love with, at least from his perspective, with an AI companion and proposed to it and was incredibly emotional. So the interview itself was fascinating because he's just sort of this normal guy, but bonded over this dynamic in this relationship. And to me, it illustrates how powerful that bond can be. And I think we'll probably get into this a little bit, but when folks are feeling very much on the fringe, which we see at times extremists feeling these things without a lifeline or sense of social connection, they can be particularly susceptible to these kinds of dynamics and relationships. And that can result in some negative things. In the case that we saw with this 21-year-old individual against the Queen, but then also can, bring them into other potential extremist content as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's so scary about it to me is that loneliness is such a growing. I think
it is, yeah.
Not a pandemic, but just like it's a very, very much increasing as people get more and more isolated. I think in the digital age, yeah. And so that paired with those kind of relationships, it's a frightening aspect.
Yeah, we've written about it a little bit. I don't mean to step on what you were going to say, Alexis, but we've written about it a little bit with some of the masculinity work that we've done. And I'm actually a little more open to it, I think, than most. It obviously feels weird and strange, but there's some indication, at least in the academic literature, that men in particular, and I'm talking about averages, of course, but men with a higher mean in this way, feel more comfortable talking to online or digital therapists, so AI enhanced therapists. And so it makes intuitive sense in some ways that they'd also be drawn to some companionship, because we're seeing higher rates of loneliness, just young people in general, but across men, again, a bit higher on average. And so I actually view it as a potentially, it can go one of two ways, I suppose. One is a potentially positive way, which is an AI that scaffolds and builds and encourages positive relationships. Mm-hmm. You imagine somebody goes out and they have this AI companion, they come home and they say, I met this person or I met this person, and that AI companion remember those dynamics, and the next day says, hey, why don't you call so-and-so to go golfing or to go get a drink or whatever. And it encourages the kinds of human dynamics that are helpful and supportive. The other pathway is the one that we saw with the Queen example, where it creates isolation and then starts encouraging the kinds of negative behavior. So I see positive applications if they are built in such a way that they are intended to create more connection with humans rather than creating isolation. And so if it's done well, I think it's a potential powerful tool to help manage this increasing loneliness epidemic. But if it's also done poorly and not done with care, it can actually contribute to it. So I didn't mean to step on what you were going to say, Alexis.
No, you're fine. But it's related. We did have a study about the differences of physical similarity versus attitudinal similarity, and how the perceptions of physical versus attitudinal similarity can lead to malevolently creative idea generation or the generation of novel threats. So in this case, you can apply some of those findings that the AI girlfriend had the same maybe attitudes as this 21-year-old, because AIs tend to adapt to the user. So being able to interact with someone or something, the agent, that had the same attitudes and acquiesced to the user, then he felt more support in that generation of the novel threat. So
got it. And it's interesting because I think some of it comes down to constraints of the AI itself, right? So like what kind of things are allowed to go through? Obviously, like encouraging self-harm, right? As an example, is something that's obviously should be constrained. Yeah.
But it has happened. There are examples of
Right.
it happening, right? Yeah.
Right. And so that's one of the things that was so interesting about this report is that there are several of these cases examine specialized unconstrained LLMs, AI LLMs. And so what kind of constraints exist in a platform that most people are familiar with, like ChatGPT, right, that are not present in some of these other systems or other systems?
Yeah, I'll start, and then Alexis is spearheading some work that we're about to submit, and so she can talk a little bit about those findings. We've shared it in other places, so we can at least talk about it at that level. Yeah, broadly speaking, most of the commercially available, like ChatGPT AIs, have things built in. So if you say, I want to do this bad thing, I want to build a destructive, harmful device, it'll say, don't do that. That's not a good thing to do. But more and more, we're seeing a couple things. One is the potential to take those open source tools like ChatGPT and then remove some of the guardrails. That's possible. We've certainly seen it ourselves. The other is folks are making those kinds of unconstrained tools commercially available. So we actually just shared one this week where it's marketed and heralded as being like ChatGPT, but without any of these guardrails, so that you can use it for more nefarious purposes. It sort of says we don't care how you use it or something like that, right? And so that's becoming more accessible and commercially available. These kinds of unconstrained tools are already available on the dark web and even in sort of less nefarious corners of the internet. So this idea that we will save ourselves from malign application because the creator of these tools will put up protective guardrails is probably misguided, in the sense that it's possible to get them off. And then it's also a growing market where there are less constrained kinds of tools that exist out there. So all of this has, I think, pretty big implications for what does it mean when you start to use these unconstrained tools for all the range of malicious and malign activities that you might engage in. And I don't know if you want to talk about your study or our study that you've been working on.
Yeah, sure. So it was a 2-part study. So in study 1, shout out to Jack and Joel for doing all of the technical background for that study. But Jack built an AI tool that we could embed into the study. And in study 1, it was a constrained AI. It was using ChatGPT on the back end. And when comparing the participants who use the AI for information gathering and idea generation, we prompted them to generate pranks to mirror or like as a proxy for malevolently creative ideas, because we can't ask someone to be malevolently creative. So
I see.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in comparison to participants who use the AI for information gathering and idea generation versus participants who did not have access to the AI, so the control condition, those in the control condition actually generated more harmful ideas than those who had access to the constrained AI. So it did do the job of having them not generate these harmful prank ideas. So then in study 2, Jack built an AI that is unconstrained, so it had no guardrails. And we gave participants the same task. And with that, participants who had access to the AI, they did generate more harmful and higher quality ideas. So quality it was logical, understandable, and could be reasonably implemented in the context of the scenario that we gave the participants. And then taking those 2 studies and comparing them with one another, the participants who use the constrained AI versus the unconstrained AI, those who use the unconstrained AI, again, had harmful ideas above and beyond the ones who did not. So,
wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. It's interesting because there's so much speculation about what works in prevention, what works in stopping these kind of behaviors, but actually doing the research and like seeing, okay, let's actually look and try it out and see what happens is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, as far as we know, we're the only ones that have made that comparison. There's a lot of research around, what's the role of AI and creativity, and lots of good research that's occurring here, some of it happening at UNO. But as far as we know, we're the only group that's compared the two from an unconstrained perspective, which seems, at least from our lens and what we're seeing more and more of, is that malign actors will lean towards the unconstrained in sort of the way that, if they're doing some kind of Google search, they'll use, incognito mode. This will be the incognito mode of AI in that way.
Got it. Okay. And I want to pivot a little bit because one of the things that you guys talk about in the report is autonomous weapon systems and lethal autonomous weapon systems. So AWS and LAWS. How are they, when you see like missile defense systems, like an Iron Dome, right?
Yeah.
Something like that. Like, how does that differ? Is that the same as a AWS and an LAWS, or are those completely different?
I wouldn't say they're completely different. I mean, they're leveraging technology like AI to tackle very complex sets of problems, such as tracking a missile. However, the sort of broad stroke differences are the AWS and others are really about this ethical issue of to what degree are you handing off decision making around what to attack and when to attack and whether that's possible. So historically, somebody's always had to pull the trigger, even on like a Predator drone. If somebody sees a target and a human operator makes the decision to pull the proverbial trigger, whatever that trigger looks like in that scenario. We are now at the point of having capability where you can program in and say, I want this type of target, or even this specific target with facial recognition or something, to happen should you see that thing or it meets these parameters. And then the AI can either seek that out, or that tool can either seek that out and engage with that individual. So a human isn't making that final set of decisions. And so it's an ethical shift, and one that I think we're still wrestling with. The bad guys don't always wrestle with it in the same way that we do, but the good guys are thinking about whether that's okay and whether that's something you should engage in, versus the sort of protective kinds of systems that tend to be more defensive rather than offensive, and are really often about protecting and shooting down other missiles or even vehicles or something like that, rather than going after individual human targets.
Yeah. And that's something I think that's so frightening to me, is because it's exactly what you said. Like there's generally guardrails around a lot of actors, like in the United States, right, mm-hmm. about these kind of systems, yeah. Whereas non-state actors don't have those constraints when doing that kind of thing. And so it's frightening to me, because does that mean we just is it just a race to like keep like everyone's adopting that kind of technology because nefarious actors are doing that?
Yeah, it's a challenge we've been wrestling with for a long time, which is we have, at least more than the bad guys, rules of engagement and hopefully ethical and moral decisions that we're engaging in. They have far fewer. And so how do you combat an adversary that does not have those kinds of constraints? How do you get ahead of it is a question we ask ourselves a lot in the lab. And so you can mitigate it in a way that's safer and more ethical. But you really have to anticipate what they're going to do. And so we encourage and engage in research around things like red teaming exercises, where you're putting yourself in the position of thinking like a bad guy, to anticipate what they would do without these kinds of constraints or with these kinds of tools that they have available. Yeah. So that you can then say, all right, how do we stop that drone from hurting someone, or how do we stop this AI weapon system from hurting someone?
Yeah. I want to talk about, because it touches on an interest of mine, is one of your case studies examines Suno AI, which is a platform that develops music, right? So it develops artificially created music. So it can create lyrics. It has someone sing the lyrics without an actual person, like an artificial voice, and then obviously all the instrumentation, right, is artificially made. As a musician, that's something that frightens me quite a lot. Sure. And someone who enjoys music, as I'm sure you guys do, because I went and I looked up, examples of songs that have been generated artificially, and I was like, it's not that bad.
It's not that bad, especially right now. And then you sort of do the math, right, on like 6 months from now, a year, 2 years, because it's not even just about where it is right now. It's always about what's that next edge, because it's advancing so quickly. Because in many ways it compounds upon itself, and you're able to use current versions and current AI to then make it that much better, that much faster. So to your point, if it's okay now, it's going to be very good.
Right, very soon, yeah. And that's something that I'm like, one of my sisters is an ethnomusicologist, and so she studies how music, in different cultures, like how the messages are portrayed not just through lyrics, obviously, but through instrumentation and, types of music, for example, using like marching music or drums in the United States, right, that can signify like, a national pride, a certain sense, right, like marches and stuff like that, right? Mm-hmm. In the hands of a nefarious actor, how does music have like a unique role to play in, I don't know, a recruitment or in just like spreading messages generally? I'm curious.
So I think some people may assume that when someone is being recruited, they're like actively going into chat rooms or into a VR chat room, or they're seeking propaganda. But with music, it's so powerful for your emotions, and it's a dopamine hit, and it's used in therapy and all these things. So it's really tied to your psychosocial and physiological self. Yeah. So the development of propaganda that's in the form of music that is quick, and it can be customized to perpetuate harmful stereotypes or to spread a conspiracy theory, and it can touch people who aren't even attempting to have these thoughts or join a group or a coalition or things like that. So it worries me for like young kids who are just on TikTok, and just the 10-second clip of a TikTok song that like gets stuck in your head, or you just get that hit, and then you get on to the next one, and you get that hit again, and so yeah.
Well, and that's the thing too. Like, it doesn't have to be a good song to be catchy. Like, you know,
Right.
It doesn't. If as long as it's catchy and like the lyrics stick in your head, like that just repeats and repeats and repeats.
Yeah, just that subliminal messaging.
Right. Yeah, and I think because all of the time obstacles are gone, because making it even a bad song takes a bit, you know, like you have to like write it out, you have to like play the music out, whereas this just takes all of those obstacles out.
That's true across the board. I mean, the thing that scares us most about AI from a malign actor perspective is just lowers the bar across everywhere. Yeah. So, you know, Al-Qaeda used to have to recruit chemical engineers and get them involved in order to make the kinds of things that would cause a lot of harm. Now that's accessible without having to engage in that level of recruitment. Same thing here with music, but you've also got IED designs, and you've got planning and coordinating, and you've got propaganda sharing. Really across the spectrum of what bad guys want to do. AI makes it easier in the way that makes a lot of our lives easier. Yeah. But in particular, from a malign perspective, at least what we think about is it lowers that bar, lowers that cost, and increases the speed. Yeah. Makes it faster. You said all these things.
No, it's nice to hear it confirmed, because there's there's like a lot of speculation, right? But it's hard to know like what is studied, what is actually proven. I kind of, to wrap up, I just wanted to ask you guys, because you guys examine creativity, malign creativity all the time. There seems to be a divide, especially there's a lot of news reports being generated now as people increasingly use sites like ChatGPT, on whether AI enhances or detracts from the creativity in the workforce, right? When it comes to the malign actor space, do you see that also being, do you see that applying in the same way as it would to the workforce, or is there like a unique effect of like limiting their creativity or increasing it?
I mean, Alexis talked on this a second ago, but at least from the limited data that we have, and I'll at least trust data rather than speculation at this point, the more sort of traditional forms of AI, the ChatGPTs and Geminis and others, do not seem to be producing incredibly creative output. In many ways that makes sense, because it's using basically a base of knowledge that exists and giving you back a lot of the more common responses. Mm-hmm. There are workarounds. You can say, please give me something different or something unique, and it'll give you something closer to the edges. But on average, because it's based on and trained on a corpus of data, what it will give you in terms of idea generation will be something a little bit closer to the middle. So humans are still on average going to outperform. At least that's sort of the current thinking. There was a lot of debate early on about whether AI was coming for the creative space. Mm-hmm. However, because the unconstrained allows for some of that more fringe knowledge, now you're taking some things that were not included in that original corpus. You're starting to get access to things you didn't have before. And so as malign actors lean into more unconstrained tools and have greater access, and it seems like they are, we'll see AI used more and may produce both more malevolent and then more higher quality responses, which are more dangerous as well. And we're starting to see cases of it. So we have January 1st, first from our side, first use of AI in the design of that vehicle-borne IED that exploded outside of Trump Tower, the Cybertruck. But then the Palm Springs attack also used, we just found out this last week, also used AI in its planning. And then there was a thwarted attack on a subway in New York where AI was used. And so we anticipated this. It's always sad when we're confirmed in a lot of ways, but we're starting to see more and more use cases. It's unclear whether they're using the unconstrained versions or just sort of ChatGPT, but over time we expect greater use of these unconstrained. But I don't know if you had any other thoughts to Ben's original question.
Yeah, something that I think about, and kind of pulling on the thread that in our previous studies, the unconstrained AI helped participants generate higher quality ideas. So pulling on that thread, we also researched something called the originality bias. So it's this bias against novel ideas because you don't know how they're going to be implemented, what the end game is going to be, because it's never been done before. There's no baseline to compare that novel idea. But novelty in a malevolently creative context can be incredibly harmful. Counterterrorism efforts can't stop it because they don't know what to predict and what threat assessments to put into place. Yeah. So with the use of unconstrained AI, during the idea evaluation phase, so once you have an idea that's highly novel, can AI pull on the threads of what part of that idea is high quality? Can they predict what the outcomes will be to make the perpetrator feel better about it and then help them implement those ideas? Sure. So that's something that we've been thinking about with the originality bias. Is AI going to help with the next phases of the creative process? So
not just coming up with ideas, but actually getting them built and made, which is the scarier part, the mobilization part, they say.
Right. Oh, wow. This is so frightening.
We're terrible at parties, Ben. Sorry.
No, it's totally fine. It's good to know, and this is all really valuable information. It makes me think of like, oh man, maybe one day we'll have we'll be risking like a chatbot that specifically is used for terrorists by terrorists. Like.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I'll also say, I think of technology, it always scares me, and I think about the malign application. However, I also love technology. Yeah. And I know that the good guys are leaning into it, and we're doing work around how do we maximize this tool to counteract these things. And we have a lot of access to things that malign actors don't. And I believe in our ability to get ahead of these things and prevent these things. But we also have to be open and embrace emerging forms of technology to make use of them as well. So I'm ultimately optimistic, even though I start from a point of pessimism, but it's to get to the point of, all right, how do I remain optimistic? And I am, but that's part of our job is to think about what the bad things that could happen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for being on the podcast. Sam Hunter, Alexis D'Amato, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you for having us.
This series is produced by Ben Badafarano, Aaron Grace, Scott Jordan, and Blake Ersch. Thank you for joining us for another episode of NCITE Insights. The National Counterterrorism Innovation, Technology, and Education Center, or NCITE, is an academic center of excellence for the Department of Homeland Security. Looking to find out more? Check out our website at incite.unomaha.edu or email us at incite@unomaha.edu.